The morning I was supposed to tour the wedding venue with my fiancé, I woke up to a voicemail from my father that sounded less like a parent and more like a corporate warning shot. "We need to talk. There are financial implications to your choices. The lawyer will be in touch." No good morning, no congratulations. Just a cold declaration that the rug was about to be pulled from under me. I stared at the phone for a long minute before hitting play again, as if maybe I'd misheard the tone, the threat, the promise that love, real, complicated, imperfect love, had become a liability to the people who once claimed to support it. I had been engaged to Ava for 6 months, and every day of it had been a battle not between us but between who we were becoming and who our families wanted us to remain. She was quiet fire and steady grace, the kind of person who didn't push but never bent, and I loved her with a clarity that made everything else feel like noise, which is exactly what my parents hated. Because Ava wasn't their kind. Not the right background, not the right look, not the kind of partner they imagined standing beside me in the annual Christmas card. They were polite at first, chilly but cordial. But as the engagement progressed and the reality of our union solidified, the mask slipped. It wasn't just disapproval, it was sabotage. Canceled catering deposits, accidentally, withheld guest lists, passive-aggressive calls to extended family, warning them the wedding might not be happening after all. And now this threatens, wrapped in voicemail. I walked into the kitchen, where Ava was sipping tea, her hair still damp from the shower, her expression calm like always, like nothing could shake her unless she allowed it. "It's started," I said quietly. "They're pulling the funding." She didn't flinch. Then we changed the plan. And that's when I knew I'd chosen the right person. Because while my parents saw this wedding as a performance, Ava saw it as a promise. That afternoon, I called my mother, hoping for a sliver of empathy. She answered on the second ring, already armed. "We can't support a decision that disrespects everything we've built," she said. "You mean everything you've controlled?" I replied. She scoffed. "You're being dramatic. This is about legacy." "No," I said. "This is about fear." And she hung up. Just like that, no attempt at reconciliation. No acknowledgement of the damage they were willing to cause in the name of appearances. Later that evening, a formal letter arrived in my inbox. From their lawyer. A bland PDF outlining the withdrawal of financial support, the cancellation of all joint contracts, and a thinly veiled request that we postpone the event until family consensus is achieved. I printed it out and laid it on the table. Ava read it once, then said, "We still getting married?" And I said, "Absolutely." Because weddings can be paid for, venues can change, guest lists can shrink. But the moment I let fear rewrite our future, I'd be marrying the ghost of someone I used to be, not the person Ava had fallen in love with. And I refused to make myself smaller just to fit in their frame. The next morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach and clarity in my spine. My parents had made their choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. Ava was already in the living room, curled up with her laptop, researching budget venues like this was just a minor inconvenience, instead of a full-scale familial rejection. "I found a courthouse with beautiful marble staircases," she said, without looking up, "and a community garden that does private ceremonies." I sat beside her, heart aching at how calm she could stay while the world we thought we were building had been flipped upside down by people who were supposed to be rooting for us. "We shouldn't have to do this," I said, quietly. "No," she replied. "But I'd rather fight beside you than bow to people who only love the version of you they can control." And just like that, I exhaled the guilt I didn't owe anymore. That afternoon, I started making calls. Canceled the extravagant venue, the overpriced florist, the band my parents had insisted on because people remember the music. What I remembered was the way my father said, "We're not paying for something we can't stand behind." As if Ava was a scandal instead of my future. As if his love had fine print. I called my sister, always the neutral one, always the bridge, and asked if she'd heard. "Mom told me you were spiraling," she said. "But honestly, I think you're just finally standing up straight." Then she added, "You should still get married. And you should still wear the suit you picked. It made you look like yourself. I hung up with tears in my eyes, not because it hurt, but because it finally didn't. Ava and I spent the evening writing a new plan on a whiteboard we bought from the hardware store. Courthouse ceremony, backyard reception, food truck instead of a caterer. We crossed out things we no longer needed and circled what mattered. Vows, witnesses, joy. I posted a message in a private group of close friends. The wedding is still on, just smaller, faster, and real. The support came in waves, people offering chairs, lights, music equipment, and their hands. Your dad might have pulled the plug, one friend texted, but we're bringing the power. I read it out loud to Ava, and she laughed so hard she snorted. That night, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was from my mother. Just one sentence. You still have time to come to your senses. I didn't respond. Because if protecting my peace meant losing their money, so be it. And if choosing Ava meant losing their blessing, it wasn't a blessing I wanted anymore. We went to bed with no plan B, only a plan us. And in the stillness of our apartment, with string lights humming and the whiteboard leaning against the wall, I realized something. We weren't just rewriting the wedding. We were reclaiming the narrative, and I would rather marry Ava on a sidewalk with no one watching than walk down the aisle funded by people who looked at my love and saw a mistake. 3 days after the fallout, Ava and I stood in the backyard of our friend Mariah's brownstone, staring at the uneven grass and the tangled string lights from last summer's barbecue, and I said, "You think this can work?" And she smiled without hesitation and said, "I think we've made it through worse than wild grass and bad wiring." That was the thing about Ava. She didn't need a venue to believe in something. She just needed intention, and we had plenty of that. We spent the morning making calls and sending out new invites. Simple, direct texts that read, "New plan, backyard ceremony, Saturday at 3, come for the vows, stay for the tacos." Within an hour, the responses came in like wildfire. "We're in. I'll bring chairs. Do you need speakers?" And one message from my old college roommate that simply said, "Tell me how I can serve joy." Meanwhile, my mother posted a vague status online, something about heartbreak, disappointment, and watching your children make public mistakes, and I didn't even blink when my aunt forwarded it to me with a shrug emoji. I wasn't interested in decoding guilt dressed up as grief. Ava found a local bakery run by a queer couple who offered to make a custom cake in 24 hours when they heard what happened. "Been there," one of them said. "This one's on us." That night we made decorations out of paper and string, poured wine into coffee mugs, and danced barefoot in our kitchen while Spotify guessed all the right songs. It wasn't the wedding we planned, but somehow it felt more like us than anything my parents had paid for. My father emailed again, this time more formal, more clipped. "If you proceed with this arrangement, we'll need to sever our financial obligations permanently. This includes housing support and your trust agreement." I showed Ava the message and she read it once, then deleted it without comment, and that silence was louder than any argument I could have made. Because what he thought was leverage was just confirmation we were doing the right thing. The next morning, my sister called. "They're saying you've embarrassed the family," she said, "but all I see is someone choosing love over optics." Then she whispered, "I'm coming. I'll be there." And I felt something crack open, not pain, but permission. Permission to stop measuring myself against the backdrop of people who mistook control for care. As Saturday crept closer, the plan came together in pieces. Borrowed tables, handmade playlists, a floral arrangement donated from the closing shift of a neighborhood shop, and Ava's grandmother mailing us her wedding veil with a note that read, "Love doesn't wait for permission." And neither did we. Because the more they tried to shame us, the more I understood this wedding wasn't falling apart. It was falling into place. We weren't eloping. We were reclaiming. And no lawyer, no disapproving parent, no canceled deposit could stop the fact that we were still going to say, "I do," just louder, freer, and surrounded by people who showed up not out of duty, but because they believed in the kind of love that doesn't require a contract to be real. The morning of the wedding arrived with birdsong, clear skies, and a quiet buzz of anticipation that made our tiny apartment feel like a cathedral. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't wake up dreading what was next. I woke up knowing we were doing the right thing. Ava sat cross-legged on the floor, applying mascara with a hand mirror and humming to herself while I paced the room rehearsing my vows, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I finally had too much to say and too little space to fit it all. At 10 a.m., Mariah texted, "The backyard is ready, string lights are up, chairs are out." The neighbor brought sangria. I smiled so hard my jaw hurt. We took turns helping each other get dressed, laughing every time one of us got emotional, which was often. My suit was the same one I'd picked with my mother months earlier, the one she had once called sharp enough for legacy photos, but now it meant something entirely different. It no longer carried their approval. It carried mine. Ava wore a silk jumpsuit and sneakers, and looked like sunlight in human form. By noon, our tiny crew of friends had transformed the backyard into a sacred space, folding chairs arranged in imperfect rows, paper lanterns swaying gently from string, and wildflowers in mason jars that someone had gathered from a roadside stall that morning. I stood at the edge of the garden and took a deep breath, the kind that reminds you you're alive. And then I saw her, Ava, walking toward me, bouquet in hand, smile wide, eyes steady. And for a moment, everything else melted. Not the missing guests, not the withheld blessings, just her. Just us. And then, we began. Our friend Sam officiated, voice shaking with joy, and the ceremony was simple, raw, beautiful. Ava's vows made me cry. Mine made her laugh through tears. And when we said, "I do," it didn't matter who wasn't there. What mattered was that everyone who was had chosen to stand beside us, not out of blood, but belief. As we kissed, someone's dog barked. The neighbors cheered from their balconies. It wasn't grand, but it was honest, and I have never felt more married in my life. Later, as we ate tacos from a truck and passed around slices of lavender cake, I spotted my sister at the edge of the crowd, holding her phone with a tight expression. "Mom just saw the photos," she said, eyes flicking up. "She's not taking it well." I shrugged. She never wanted to take it, honestly. A few hours later, after the music had faded and the last friend had hugged us goodbye, Ava and I lay in bed, still dressed, still glowing, and she whispered, "You know they'll try again, right?" And I nodded. "But they won't win, because we already did." And I believed it, because this wasn't the wedding they'd wanted, but it was the marriage we deserved, built not from money or manipulation, but from something far harder to break. True. The morning after the wedding, I woke to sunlight streaking across our sheets and the quiet sound of Ava making coffee in the kitchen, and for a moment, I forgot about the chaos we'd come through. Forgot about the letters, the threats, the cold absence of the people who were supposed to stand in the front row. All I could feel was peace. The kind that seeps in when you've chosen yourself and survived the fallout. I joined her at the table, both of us still in pajamas, and we sat in silence, sipping coffee like a couple that had nothing to prove anymore. Around 10, my phone buzzed, a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail, but a minute later, a text popped up. "I'm outside." It was my mother. I opened the door slowly, half expecting a scene, half hoping she'd surprise me. She stood there in a navy coat, no makeup, eyes tired. "I saw the pictures," she said. "It looked real." I didn't respond, just held the door without inviting her in. "Can I talk to you?" she asked. I nodded and stepped aside. She sat on the edge of the couch, like it wasn't hers to sit on, and maybe for the first time, it wasn't. "Your father doesn't know I'm here," she said, quickly. "He's still angry. He thinks you embarrassed us." I let the words land, but I didn't rush to soften them. "Did I?" I asked. She looked down. "No," she admitted. "You embarrassed the version of us we wanted the world to see." That was the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. "You cut me out," I said. "You sent a lawyer before you ever picked up the phone." "We thought we were protecting you," she said. "From what?" I asked. "From loving someone too freely?" She swallowed hard. from stepping outside what we understood. I almost laughed. Then maybe the problem was your understanding. We sat in silence for a beat. She looked around our small apartment. The dried flowers from the ceremony, the framed photo of Ava and me at the courthouse. It's beautiful, she said. Not polished, but real. That's the point, I said. It was never about the venue or the seating chart. It was about who showed up for us when it mattered. I didn't, she said quietly. No, I agreed. You didn't. She stood then, slowly, and reached into her coat pocket, pulling out a small envelope. This isn't a bribe, she said. It's a start. I didn't open it. I just nodded and walked her to the door. This doesn't fix everything, I said. I know, she replied, but I wanted to say it. I was wrong. And for the first time, I believed she meant it. I closed the door behind her, sat down at the table, and stared at the envelope. Ava walked in and raised an eyebrow. That your mom? I nodded. She brought peace, I said. Not a blessing, just a beginning. And somehow, that felt like enough. The envelope sat unopened on our kitchen table for 2 full days. Not because I was afraid of what was inside, but because I finally didn't need it to decide how I felt. Ava didn't ask about it, didn't push. She just let it sit there like a test I no longer had to take. On the 3rd morning, while she made breakfast, I opened it. No letter, just a check. Handwritten, no memo line, no conditions. $10,000. I stared at it for a long minute, then slid it back into the envelope and tucked it into a drawer we rarely opened. The one where we kept things that once meant something but no longer decided our next step. That afternoon, I got a message from my father. Not a call, just a forwarded article from a wedding blog. Our photos had gone semi-viral. Backyard brilliance. How one couple turned rejection into a real celebration. No caption, no acknowledgement, just the link. I didn't reply. Because if he couldn't say the words out loud, I wasn't going to give him the grace of pretending they'd been said. Meanwhile, texts continued rolling in from people who'd been at the wedding or seen the photos online. You two made me believe in love again. That kiss in front of the taco truck, iconic. Thank you for reminding us what a wedding should feel like. Every message chipped away at the shame I'd once been handed like an inheritance. I didn't feel like a disappointment anymore. I felt like a disruptor, and I liked that better. Ava spent the evening on the phone with the bakery, arranging for extra cupcakes to be delivered to the staff at the hospital where her mom had been treated last year. They believed in us before we believed in ourselves, she said. I watched her from across the room, heart swollen with something deeper than romance. It was reverence. This woman, this life, this choice we made without compromise. I sat down and finally wrote a post of my own, no hashtags, no apologies. Just a photo of us at the altar, sunlit and laughing, and a caption that read, "They canceled the wedding, we built a marriage." By morning, it had been shared 1,000 times. A girl from my high school I hadn't spoken to in years messaged me. I'm getting married next year. My family's trying to run the show. Reading this made me change everything. And just like that, the story we once thought we were surviving became a story other people were drawing strength from. The next night, Ava and I stood on the fire escape with mugs of tea, watching the city glow below. You know, I said, for a wedding that was never supposed to happen, this feels like everything. She leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "That's because we stopped waiting for permission." And in that quiet, I finally understood. The wedding wasn't the beginning. Choosing ourselves, that was. It was a Tuesday afternoon when my father finally called. Not a text, not an email, an actual call, and I let it ring twice before answering. Not out of pettiness, but because I needed a breath, just one, to remind myself that I was no longer the child waiting for approval. "Hello," I said evenly, already knowing this wasn't going to be an apology, but curious what shape his discomfort would take. "I saw the article," he began, tone clipped. "Practiced. Your mother said she spoke with you." I didn't respond right away. Let the silence stretch. Let him earn the next sentence. "You looked happy," he added. "It looked honest. And there it was. Not love, not pride, but something resembling acknowledgement. It was, I said, everything we needed, nothing we didn't. He cleared his throat. I don't agree with how you went about it. I know, I said, but I didn't need your agreement. You're still my son, he said, voice softening. You always will be. And I exhaled, because that was the closest I would ever get to, I'm sorry. I didn't thank him. I didn't say I love you. I just said, we're doing fine, and meant it. After we hung up, Ava walked in with a bag of groceries and asked, was that him? I nodded. He said it looked honest. She smiled, set the bag down, and said, that's because it was. That weekend we hosted our first dinner as a married couple. Nothing fancy, just a few friends, a long table, too many candles, and music that played low enough for real conversation. Mariah brought flowers, my sister brought wine. Even Ava's dad flew in from Portland with a hug that made me believe in second chances. At the end of the night, after everyone had gone and the dishes were stacked in a happy kind of mess, Ava leaned against the counter and said, you think they'll ever really get it? I paused, then said, maybe not, but we're not waiting on them anymore. She nodded, reached for my hand, and said, good, because I never needed them to get it. I just needed you to keep choosing it. And I would. 1,000 times over, because somewhere between canceled contracts and cold silence, I had found the version of myself that didn't need to perform to be worthy. I didn't need the big wedding. I didn't need the trust fund. I didn't need to be walked down the aisle by a man who only believed in love when it looked like him. I needed this. Our life, our truth, our home, built from scratch and held together by the quiet power of two people who said yes when everyone else said don't. And in that tiny kitchen, barefoot and loved, I realized we hadn't just rewritten a wedding. We had rewritten the definition of family. Fall settled in slow and golden, like the world itself had decided to breathe with us, and for the first time in months, life didn't feel like a negotiation. It felt like it was ours. The wedding photos lived in a folder on our desktop, not curated for likes or approval, just waiting to be opened on quiet nights when we needed reminding of what we built from nothing. We framed one and hung it by the door. Us laughing mid-vow, surrounded by friends, tacos, and borrowed folding chairs. Every time I passed it, I remembered what it felt like to stop, waiting for acceptance, and start choosing joy. The check from my mother still sat untouched in the drawer, and maybe that's where it would stay. Not as a symbol of guilt or reconciliation, but as proof that when people finally show up, it's too late to buy back the parts of you they ignored. I'd been promoted at work. Ava was launching a new project with the hospital foundation. We were stable. We were grounded. But more than anything, we were free. Not the kind of freedom that comes from cutting people off, but the kind that comes when you stop needing anything from the ones who kept you small. One Sunday morning, we walked to the farmer's market, coffees in hand, her fingers laced in mine, and I ran into a cousin I hadn't seen since before the fallout. She blinked, surprised, then smiled awkwardly. You look good, she said. The photos were, actually, really beautiful. I just smiled back. Thanks. It was exactly what it needed to be. She hesitated, then added, they still talk about it, you know. Your parents. I nodded. Let them. And we walked on. That night, I got a message from my dad. No preamble, just a photo of his hand resting on a copy of a book I'd once told him changed my life. Beneath it, one line, trying to understand. I stared at it for a while, not moved, not angry, just still. I didn't reply, but I didn't delete it either. Because maybe some stories don't end in forgiveness or reconciliation. Maybe they end in clarity, in a quiet knowing that you told the truth and you survived the silence that followed. Weeks later, I gave a talk at a local event, a panel on love, courage, and chosen family. Someone asked, what advice would you give to someone whose parents are threatening to walk away if they marry who they love? And I said, let them walk. Then build something so beautiful, so full of truth, that they have to look back and wonder what they lost. The room went quiet, but not out of discomfort, out of recognition. Because every person there knew what it was like to be underestimated, to be shamed into submission, to feel like their joy required a permission slip. And that night, as Ava and I lay in bed, rain tapping the windows, I whispered, "We did it." And she said, "No, we're still doing it." And she was right. If you've ever been told to wait, to shrink, to choose comfort over truth, this story is yours too. Because they canceled the wedding, but they didn't cancel the love. They threatened lawyers, but they didn't scare us silent. And what happened next wasn't vengeance. It was liberation. If this story made you feel seen, drop a comment. Tell me what you've walked away from and what you built instead. Like, comment, subscribe. Because this isn't just about defying their version of love. It's about defining our own.